This next lesson is on music production and will help you record your own sounds and give you an insight into modern music making software. This module is intended to give you a great grounding for recording your musical ideas and developing them using professional production techniques. Whether you just want to build samples for your live performance or write a complete song from scratch, these lessons will take you through the necessary skills needed. Alongside the lessons, there is a glossary to help you with some of the unknown jargon you'll hear and some useful info to refer to when recording and mixing. When picking a space, you can sometimes be limited to a room in your house, so padding and sound deflectors are needed to flatten the room, especially if it's a very square room with flat, hard walls. If you're lucky enough to have an irregular shaped room with soft furnishings about the place, with plenty of wood in the structure, then minimal proofing is needed. Do experiment with recording in all of the rooms of the building you're in, as you can get great natural reverb effects, i.e. the bathroom for vocals to give them a resonating sound, and hallways to get slapback effects. Goes without saying, but a desk and a comfy chair is a must. You'll need a hardware interface with mic line inputs and outputs. The number of inputs is up to you. How many instruments do you want to record at one time? It should have MIDI in and out, phantom power capabilities, and sample rates from 44.1 kHz to 96 kHz, and 24-bit processing. Monitors or speakers that can either be active or passive. There's little differences in the sound when you invest good money into your speakers, but the budget end of the market can mean going for second-hand passive speakers and an amp, as the fashionable active variety can have poor amp drivers at low prices. You'll need microphones, which are covered in the next lesson, with XLR leads and mic stands. A pop shield is useful too for vocalists. Headphones are needed for yourself, but if you're recording more than one performer at one time, then you're going to need more headphones and a headphone distribution amp with multi-outs. A MIDI keyboard and MIDI lead, useful for playing in lines and triggering samples. A DI box is useful, but these are generally used on stage to lift the signal of an instrument, but are also useful in the studio to lift the grounding of an instrument that is buzzing or has an unwanted hum. A portable hard disk recorder with mic can be useful for field recordings. And the producer's best friend, fabric tape, also known as gaffer tape or duct tape. Great for taping down cables and for strapping microphones to difficult places. You can keep expanding on these with more equipment like vintage analog hardware, new age MIDI controllers, and outboard compressors, but the aforementioned is all you really need to start recording your own sounds. Something I didn't account for when I first started building my studio was the amount of cables I needed. Here are the most common for audio connectivity. The MIDI is used for in and out connections between your hardware interface and your MIDI instruments. Mono jack is just the tip and the sleeve for a mono signal, which is used for speaker cables and countless instruments such as electric guitar, electric bass, electric keyboard, and violins with pickups. The stereo jack has a tip, ring and sleeve, and is used in things like headphones and some instruments and effects pedals that have a stereo out. XLRs are also used for loudspeakers, and are better than jacks because they balance the signal that is sent to the speakers, giving you a truer sonic image. They're also used for most microphones, as they can carry phantom power to power the active circuit, and also click into the socket so they can't be yanked out. Audio phono cables are used for most old school equipment, like turntables, hi-fis, tape decks, and are still used today for TV consoles and portable recorders. If you can use a separate room for your recording and set up your recording equipment in another room, then that would be useful for less unwanted noise on the recording. But you can record in the same room as your computer, but try to shield off the players with acoustic shields, things like sofas, mattresses and duvets, to minimise the noise. When setting up your monitors, keep them away from the corners of the room, as the reflection will distort the stereo effect. There are all sorts of microphones out there, and they each have a different purpose. They all have their own polar pattern, which is due to the shape of the capsule, the kind of transducer sensor it has, and to some extent the external casing. This means that microphones have different directional responses from its centre axes. There are two types of microphone placement, close miking and ambient miking, or also known as distance miking. If you want an intimate sound where you can hear every detail of the instrument, you need to close mic it. But if you're looking to pick up the sound of the room and many instruments with one microphone, then you need to set up an ambient mic. Using the right mic for the job is important. When miking up a guitar, there's different options you have to get different colours and tones. With the neck placement, you get a clear and bright sound of the strings, but you do lose some of the warmth from the body of the guitar. Some engineers favour placing the mic directly over the hole, as you do get the sound of the fingers hitting the strings and get all the punch from the sound hole. That's good for rhythm guitar, but for lead guitar, the body gives off a lot more resonance, and this can be picked up by placing the mic at the rear, just off the face of the body. Also, using a combination of these can get great effects. It's good to use two mics for this instrument, a large diaphragm condenser mic just off at the bridge to pick up the low frequencies, and a pencil condenser mic placed by the fretboard to give the higher percussive sounds. Vocals need a microphone with a large diaphragm. Ribbon microphones are favoured by many producers as they are powered by a valve which adds warmth to the sound, but a good condenser mic can also get good results. A pop shield is handy to stop the breath popping on the mic, but a good alternative is some thin foam strapped to the microphone. When miking an amp, you can use either a condenser microphone for getting a good low frequency response, or a dynamic cardioid mic to get a strong mid to high response. Placement can make a big difference. Directly in front of the cone will give more punch, and off at an angle will give a thinner, less attacking sound. Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page was famous for distance recording his guitar amps in a corridor, giving a more epic, resonant sound. A drum can be recorded in many ways, and experimentation is good when trying to capture the skin sound. It's good to place a condenser just off the brim at an angle, but when miking a drum kit, you'll need specialist mics for the kick, snare, hi-hat and cymbals, and information on placement can be found on many websites. I'm planning to make a song using my own sounds, so my first task would be to gather my samples I'm going to use for my drum machines and sampler. You can start composing a tune any way you want. Some people start with drums, some with vocal samples, but for this example I'm going to build my track around a guitar riff. Once you've set your microphones in position and plug them into your hardware interface using the appropriate lead, you need to check if the mic needs phantom power. Some microphones won't need phantom power, my condenser mic on the other hand does, so I'm switching it on with the volume down. Create an audio channel and name it. In this case I'm starting with the guitar riff, so I'm going to name it Guitar. Open Preferences to make sure the software is picking up the hardware. A good standard sample rate is 48,000, and I'm going to set the buffer speed quite low as I want minimal latency. 256 should do. On the newly made channel, make sure the input and output is set correctly. You'll need to check the level. Some hardware interfaces have a level monitor, but otherwise you can switch on the monitor button in Ableton, making sure the volume is down to avoid feedback, and use the level meter to check the level. For close-up miking, you're looking for the largest signal without it going into the red, or it will distort. Some recording artists like to use this distortion to their advantage, but to gain the largest amount of control, it's good to apply the distortion afterwards. Otherwise, there's no going back if it's on the original recording. The same applies to distance recording, so it doesn't need to be as close to the peak as close-up recording. It's good to do a test recording before you do it for real, to check if everything's sounding how you want. There might be a buzzing lead or a hum from somewhere. Believe me, it's very annoying to discover this after you've done the best take ever. I'm going to be playing along with a click track for my guitar sample, so it's in time. I'm using the headphones to listen to the click, so it doesn't bleed onto the recording. I've set the tempo now, it's time to record. Once you're happy with it, save your work. I generally build my song in the same session as I've gathered my samples, but you can do it in 2 separate sessions to keep it tidy. Now I'm going to sample some drum hits for my drum machine. Same process as before, but this time we don't have to worry about playing in time, as these are individual hits that are going to be loaded into the drum machine later. You can use any object to make a sound. I'm going to use a selection of cardboard boxes and paper to make my drum hits. Once you've finished recording, you need to edit them, trimming the beginning and the end and normalising them. Make sure they're labelled clearly so you can find them later. There are many good presets to most synths, but to have control over your synth, some knowledge of its workings are essential to make it interesting and original. I'm using Reason's Subtractor to show you the controls of a basic subtractive synthesizer, but the lessons can be applied to any subtractive synth on the market. The sound is generated on a subtractive synth by the oscillator. It generates one of many waveforms with different timbres. Check useful info for the different kinds. I've written a few notes, and I'm going to choose a sawtooth wave to take you through the workings. Here you can adjust the phase, tuning and switch between the octaves. The phase control can give a different timbre to the sound. Clicking here multiplies the wave and offsets it with the original to create a new wave. And clicking here it subtracts the wave with itself and offsets it to create another new sound. You'll also see there's a second oscillator underneath. Adding another waveform to the mix means the FM and ring modulation control comes into play. Adding frequency modulation means the second oscillator modulates the first oscillator, giving it more movement. The ring modulator adds the two waves together, creating again another new sound. Turning the mix control will bring in the new modulated sound, which can vary from a smooth to a jarring dissonant bell-like sound. You can also add noise to the mix, which adds grit and a distortion-like quality to the sound. Looking at the filter, it has a frequency control and a resonance control. Switching between the different types, notch, high pass, band pass, and low pass, you can hear it can cut and boost specific frequency ranges in a smooth and dramatic way. The KBD knob, if turned up, makes the filter frequency open, the higher the notes you play on the keyboard. The filter envelope controls the ADSR of the filter, and it's great to slow down the impact of the filter and create some really squelchy effects. The button above the amount control is used to invert the ADSR envelope that you've set to give the reverse of the shape instantly. The amp envelope works in the same way as the filter, but affects the amplitude of the notes. To give even more movement to the sound, there's an LFO, which uses its own wave shapes, which can fluctuate the pitch, frequency filter, frequency modulation, phase, and the mix between the two generated sounds. This can sync with the tempo, or run free in its own time. There are some expression tools too, which you can find on the right of the device. You can change the way the filter frequency and resonance react to how hard you play the note by turning these knobs down. You can also change the polyphonic value here, which sets how many notes can be played at one time. The portamento knob makes the note slide into the next, like this. Drum machines can produce beats using different sound sources. Some use oscillators to create a sine wave for the kick and white noise for the snare, and some use audio samples to resemble the sound of a drum kit. In Ableton's Live, there is a device called Impulse, which emulates the old 808 and 909 drum machines, among many others. To show you the workings though, I'm going to use Reason's Kong drum machine, as it shows the workings much more clearly. For electronic kits, it uses an analog modelling module, and you can add effects to each hit to create texture and space. As with synths, you can control the ADSR of the sound, and as with the original drum machines from 30 years ago, you can change the pitch and tone to give more authenticity. Looking at sample-based drum machines, I'm going to load in the samples I recorded earlier of the cardboard boxes and paper, and the options you have to control each hit are similar to synth-based drum machines, but you're also able to layer up the sounds on one hit and assign velocity parameters. So a gentle hit will give one texture, and a louder hit will trigger a different sound and texture. There's many uses for a sampler, as a drum machine, a lead instrument, or just as a looper. You can use tones from likely sources such as a voice, wind instrument, or organs, but also unlikely sources such as washing machines, creaky doors, and industrial sounds. What's great is you can layer all these sounds to create a whole new instrument. I'm using Reason's NNXT sampler for this example. The first step is to load your chosen samples into the sampler. I'm going to use some sounds I prepared earlier. Some samplers will automatically assign the sounds across the keyboard, but generally you need to set it by hand. Moving the play mode, You can set it to play just once, or loop while the note is depressed. You can also reverse the sample, and have it play forwards into reverse and back again continuously. Like the synth, you have control over the amp and filter, and their ADSR envelopes, as well as 2 LFOs and the expression of each note. The advantage of a sampler is you can easily change the pitch of the sample as you go, and layer up the same sample at different speeds on top of itself.